Right, so in light of the most recent events, it could be argued that the latest Freedom Flotilla Coalition mission was a warning shot, and something more akin to a Freedom Armada might be the reply, such as how the latest mission about the Handela and the Madleen and the Conscience and the Mavi Marmara before them have influenced this much bigger planned response that's now coming down the line. Since 2010, the Freedom Flotilla Coalition has launched civilian boats daring to defy Israel's siege of Gaza. The world has watched in horror and revulsion and anger as activists were captured or indeed killed for trying to break the siege. But the lesson wasn't lost. You can shoot the messengers, but you can't sink the message, and the message is getting louder. 15 years later from those tragic events of the Mavi Marmara, the situation in Gaza has grown from crisis to cataclysm. And where the crew of the Handela now endure beatings and appalling mistreatment, their message is now being picked up and carried on by those involved in the Samud Land Convoy. That attempt to break the siege via Egypt, only to be stopped by Israel's man in Cairo, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, a man who is digging his own political grave right now, even more deeply, as they've traded in their wheels for sails. They're coming with defiance in those sails, international law in their wake, and a burning truth no naval blockade can hold back, because if governments won't act, ordinary people will, and this time in the multitude of boats, and they'll be bringing the very thing Israel fears the most, which isn't bullets, of course, but baby milk and nappies and flour. Right, so back in 2010, the Freedom Flotilla sailed into global consciousness as a coalition of international activists dared to challenge Israel's naval blockade of Gaza. Their ships carried not weapons, of course, but medicine and food, and the simple defiant message that Palestinians under siege would not be forgotten. What they received in return was a brutal assault by Israeli commandos that left 10 activists dead aboard the Mavi Marmara. That event shocked the world, but it also galvanized a movement. In 2025, the situation has, of course, grown darker still. The siege has tightened, the death toll has soared, and famine has spread through Gaza like a slow-moving fire. But once again, the ships are sailing. This time, it's not just a flotilla, though. It's what I'm calling an armada this time instead, and there's good reason for it. The transition from the Samud Land Convoy to the global Samud Flotilla represents not merely a change in route, but a massive escalation in civilian resistance to siege and complicity. The land is blocked, as we now know. They've tried it. Sisi made sure of that in Egypt. The skies are lethal as well, of course. But the sea remains open, just barely. As governments entrench themselves in hypocrisy and inaction, civil society has risen to challenge this paralysis. First came the Freedom Flotilla. Now comes this Freedom Armada. Not just one boat, but hopefully a great many of them. You see, the Samud Land Convoy was a bold act of transnational solidarity in and of itself, you might recall. A civilian-led effort just last month to drive humanitarian aid from Tunis through Libya and into Gaza via Egypt's Rafah crossing. Organisers hope to awaken the Arab world's dormant conscience here, uniting North African nations under a shared banner of support for Palestine. The convoy was powerful in both symbolism and its scope, featuring over 1,000 participants from Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Mauritania, and beyond that. But when it reached eastern Libya last month, it met an unfortunately immovable force: Egyptian obstruction. Egypt's refusal to grant entry permits was decisive. It was not merely a bureaucratic hurdle, it was a political message. Eastern Libyan militias aligned with Cairo detained activists, blocked convoys at Sirte, and denied them food, fuel, and passage. Egypt would not allow even non-violent resistance to approach Gaza from their side. As reported by independent Egyptian news outlet Mavi Marmara, the convoy was forced to retreat, citing safety concerns and the detainment of participants. The incident made one thing abundantly clear, though. The gate to Gaza's lifeline was being actively guarded not only by Israel, but by Egypt itself as well. Yet Sisi's government did not stop at just refusal. When public pressure mounted for Egypt to facilitate aid to Gaza, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi made a deeply revealing and frankly humiliating appeal, because he called upon the tangerine twit passing himself off as President of the United States, Donald Trump, to use his influence to get aid into Gaza, despite the fact that Egypt holds full sovereign control over its side of the Rafah border crossing, can do this itself if Sisi had a spine, and could have let the Samud Land Convoy do all of this for him, in fact, instead of stopping them. So this appeal was not just cowardly, it was an abdication of responsibility and an explicit surrender of Arab sovereignty to foreign powers. The idea that Egypt, a state of 100 million people with one of the largest militaries in the region, can't perform a humanitarian act in the face of mass starvation and genocide exposed the extent to which Cairo had subordinated its moral compass to Western and Israeli interests. Worse still, Sisi made a particularly revealing remark during his televised appeal, because he said the Rafah border crossing with Gaza is designed for individuals and its operation requires approval from the party occupying the other side. Now, this was actually a rather stunning admission. With those words, Sisi effectively gave Israel a de facto veto over the crossing, despite the fact that Israel's control of the Gaza side is both illegal and in violation of Egypt's own peace treaty with Israel. Under the 1979 Egypt-Israel peace treaty, the Camp David Accords, Israel agreed to withdraw from the Sinai and respect Egyptian sovereignty along the Philadelphia corridor, which borders Gaza, it being illegal for them to enter the corridor. It's a buffer zone on the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing they're forbidden from. Yet it was in May of last year that Israeli forces entered the corridor and took control of the Gazan side of Rafah, in breach of the treaty's military annexes. And rather than protesting the violation or defending Egypt's sovereign rights, Sisi just chose to normalise Israel's unlawful presence there, allowing them to remain there, and is now treating it as a legitimate authority that must be consulted as to whether the crossing can even be opened from Egypt's side. His comment reframed Egypt not even as a sovereign state here, in effect, but as a subordinate facilitator of Israeli policy. Instead of invoking Egypt's legal rights or international law, Sisi deferred to an occupier, creating the absurd impression that a besieged population requires permission from its jailer to receive aid. By giving Israel a veto over Rafah, Sisi effectively ceded control of Egypt's own border and abandoned both his legal obligations under international humanitarian law and his moral responsibilities to the Palestinian people, whilst also surrendering Egyptian sovereignty. Spineless just isn't a big enough word for him. Sisi's betrayal of Gaza and of Egypt has been made even worse following a statement issued earlier this month by Al-Azhar, the most prestigious Sunni Islamic institution in the world, a statement condemning Israel's actions in Gaza as a genocide. But within 48 hours, under pressure from Egypt's foreign ministry and presidential advisors, Al-Azhar was forced to delete its statement. The official excuse was that such language would hinder diplomatic negotiations, but in reality, it was a blatant act of censorship, surely. Egypt's authoritarian regime could not tolerate even religious institutions speaking the truth that embarrasses them. The retraction revealed just how deeply Egypt has become entangled in complicity with Israeli impunity. Not only has Cairo become an enforcer of Israel's blockade, it's become a censor of the truth as well, silencing its own religious authorities to shield Israel from accountability. Sisi's actions, refusing to open Rafah, blocking the Samud Land Convoy, calling on Trump, treating Israel as a gatekeeper, censoring Al-Azhar, it makes it abundantly clear that Egypt is not a neutral force. It is a collaborator here. It is not a gateway for aid, but a blockade partner. It's not a leader of the Arab world, but a subcontractor for apartheid now. So that's why the land convoy failed, and why an alternative route has had now to be found. Not that the alternative is easy either, as the crew of the Handela are very much now experiencing. The Handela, of course, set sail earlier this month, carrying not just aid, but a political message with it, the same message that the Freedom Flotilla Coalition have carried for 15 years, that of humanitarianism and breaking the Gaza siege. Aboard this latest mission were 21 civilians from over a dozen countries, human rights defenders, trade unionists, journalists, medical workers. Their cargo included all the usual items that Israel seems so afraid of: flour and baby formula and medicine. They posed no threat to anyone. But they were stopped in international waters, just as before, an act of piracy, as that is, by the Israeli Navy, boarded at gunpoint and dragged away to detention in Israel. Amongst those that have been detained is Chris Smalls, a prominent African-American labour organiser and union leader, organiser of the Amazon Labour Union. According to multiple reports, Smalls has been physically assaulted by Israeli officers upon arrival at Givon prison. He was choked, kicked and held in solitary conditions. It has been argued that his treatment may be racially motivated too, noting that he was the only visibly black member of the crew, and has apparently received far harsher treatment than the others. And this suspicion is not without precedent. Israel has a long and well-documented record of anti-black racism. Ethiopian Israelis, who make up a significant portion of the Jewish population, have reported systematic discrimination in education and policing and employment. In 2015, protests erupted after video footage showed Israeli police brutally beating an Ethiopian Israeli soldier. African asylum seekers from Eritrea and Sudan have been labelled as infiltrators by politicians and have faced indefinite detention, denial of refugee status and dehumanising rhetoric. Racist statements by prominent Israeli religious and political figures against black Africans have also been reported, adding to the culture where anti-blackness is both institutional and cultural. So in this context, it's entirely reasonable to interpret the especially violent treatment of Christmas not as an isolated act of cruelty, but actually as part of a broader pattern. Despite international condemnation, 14 of the activists remain in detention and have launched a hunger strike. They demanded recognition as humanitarian actors and refused voluntary deportation. Israel's legal system responded with predictability. A detention review tribunal upheld their imprisonment, ignoring the clear violations of maritime law and the principle of freedom of navigation. As Squawk Box put it, the tribunal was a kangaroo court, a legal theatre masking state repression. So it is in this landscape of impunity and betrayal and resistance that the global Samud Flotilla has emerged. This is not a lone ship or a symbolic gesture this time. This is an armada potentially, a coalition of dozens of boats, preparing to sail from multiple Mediterranean ports, coordinated by activists from more than 40 countries. The name Samud means steadfastness in Arabic, and the flotilla embodies that spirit. It is not only an act of humanitarian delivery now, this is a political rupture that's being attempted. The Samud Flotilla matters because it reclaims the sea as a site of struggle. It represents a collective decision that the land route is too corrupted by tyranny and cowardice, and so the sea is where they need to turn to next. The Armada is not just defying Israel's siege, it's defying the world's silence as well. Every ship that sails is going to be a repudiation of complicity. Every volunteer aboard is a refusal to look away. Every port that allows departure is a crack in the architecture of global indifference here. This Freedom Armada is the culmination of a deeper shift in resistance. When governments refuse to act, ordinary people must, and ordinary people are. When institutions are silent, conscience has to be what speaks out. And when borders are closed, the sea must be opened. It challenges us all to ask questions of ourselves, actually. What does it mean for a sovereign Arab state like Egypt to close its gates while Israel slaughters its neighbours? What does it say about the international community that we are all a part of, that our governments are a part of, that ships carrying baby milk are met with naval commandos? And what future is left for humanity if we abandon the besieged to just die while arguing over procedure? The Samud Flotilla answers these questions not with theory but with action. It declares that the age of cowardice must end, that neutrality in the face of genocide is not a virtue, but complicity, that silence is not diplomacy, it is betrayal. Israel can bomb the sky and mine the land, but it cannot command the tides. Egypt can seal its borders and silence its scholars, but it can't stop the waves, nor what rides upon them. The Freedom Armada rises not because of a strategy alone, but because the sea does not bend to cowardice. When governments fail, and they have to a grotesque degree here, ordinary people will rise. We show what we are as ordinary people, show what we are made of, and it's sterner stuff than they are, clearly. And when we are blocked, we reroute. This is what the Samud movement has done. Shifted from wheels to sails, from land to sea, from convoy to armada. In doing so, they reclaimed not only Gaza's hope, but the world's moral compass along with it. First came the Freedom Flotilla, now comes a Freedom Armada, and I hope it becomes a vast fleet with the wind in their sails. And this time Israel won't be able to turn it all back, will it? The backlash against Israel is building even amongst its allies, though, and the actions taken against the Handala that the Samud Flotilla might face could well be documented against those involved in a court of law, as this story here will tell you all about as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.